Power thrives in shadows. It operates behind polished doors, within private circles, and often beyond the scrutiny of institutions meant to guard against its excesses. Few stories reveal this more starkly than that of Jeffrey Epstein. His life, his crimes, and his death form not only the narrative of a man but of a system in which wealth bought silence, proximity conferred protection, and survivors were left to fight for acknowledgement in a world reluctant to listen. This story does not sensationalize his fall. Instead, it examines the architecture of influence that enabled it, the failures of oversight that prolonged it, and the voices that refused to remain buried beneath reputation and secrecy. At its heart, it is a story about power, how it is built, how it is shielded, and what happens when its foundations are finally exposed. On August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found lifeless on the floor of his cell. The official determination was suicide by hanging. Yet the circumstances surrounding his death, malfunctioning cameras, the sudden removal of his cellmate, failures in routine monitoring, triggered immediate and persistent doubt. A man who had cultivated relationships with presidents, princes, Silicon Valley elites, academic luminaries, and global financiers had died in federal custody under circumstances that strained belief. What followed was not simply the end of a life. It was the unspooling of secrets, the exposure of institutional failures, and the eruption of survivor voices long relegated to footnotes. This is the story of power and of the systems that enable it, of how influence can become a shield, and how, when the shield cracks, the consequences are profound and enduring. It is the account of survivors who demanded to be heard, of journalists who refused to look away, and of a legal system forced to confront its limits. The man at the center of this story weaponized wealth and proximity to authority. He built a network so dense that, even after his death, it left more questions than answers. This narrative traces that construction, the structures that sustained it, the fall, and the reverberations that continue to shape conversations about accountability. Jeffrey Edward Epstein was born in Brooklyn on January 20th, 1953. He emerged from a working-class background with an intellect and social agility that would prove instrumental to his rise. After brief stints at Cooper Union and New York University, he took a position teaching math and physics at the Dalton School, an institution attended by the children of New York's well-connected families. It was there that proximity began to replace pedigree. A parent from the school's community, an executive at a major financial firm, recognized Epstein's facility with people and numbers. That connection opened a door into finance. Epstein's early professional reputation was not built on formal credentials, it was built on persuasion. He cultivated trust, managed confidences, and learned quickly that influence often derives from the people who stand within reach, not the ones who stand above. His tenure at a major investment bank ended amid undisclosed policy violations. Rather than marking a retreat, it was a pivot. Epstein established his own financial consulting operation, a firm cloaked in privacy and layers of corporate opacity that would become a hallmark of his professional life. By the early 1990s, Epstein controlled wealth that was difficult to reconcile with the publicly available record of his business activity. Shell companies and offshore accounts concealed the sources and destinations of money, yet money was only one instrument in his arsenal. What Epstein most valued was the access it purchased. Where many seek ostentation, Epstein preferred exclusivity. He bought property not as trophies but as instruments, a palatial Manhattan home that functioned as both residence and reception hall, an estate in Palm Beach that became a site for private meetings, a private island in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and a jet that could transport favored guests and associates on short notice. These spaces created a private geography in which his social life and his more ominous activities could be conducted beyond public scrutiny. There is a critical lesson in this early phase. Wealth alone was insufficient. What made Epstein consequential was his ability to weave relationships across spheres of influence, to fashion a social architecture in which the right introductions, the right donations, and the right appearances could translate into an almost impenetrable social camouflage. By the mid-1990s, Epstein had transformed those instruments into an empire predicated on control and secrecy. His properties functioned as nodes in a network, each designed to host select people and contain specific dynamics. They were curated environments, luxurious, discreet, and organized to eliminate casual observers. The transactions that undergirded Epstein's lifestyle were opaque. Client lists were hidden behind layers of fiduciary arrangements. Financial flows moved through entities designed to limit transparency. Donations were donated in ways that conferred legitimacy. Universities, research centers, and philanthropic organizations accepted his money. In exchange, he gained access to corridors of prestige and expertise, securing in effect an imprimatur of respectability. This was an intentional trade, funding research and philanthropic projects, endowing chairs, underwriting think tank events. Each gift supplied an interchange. Epstein's philanthropy bought social proof. It gave him access to elite gatherings and a seat at tables that many coveted. In those contexts, he could present himself as a benefactor, a patron of science, an interlocutor with the world's intellectuals. The veneer mattered precisely because it reduced suspicion. But that reputation coexisted with allegations and whispers. Reports of troubling behavior surfaced as early as the 1990s, yet those reports were often marginalized, minimized, or diverted by legal agreements, non-disclosure settlements, and institutional reticence. The same mechanisms that conferred respectability also provided shields. Prestige confers protection, wealth buys silence, and the architecture of elite institutions can inadvertently prioritize access over accountability. The result was an environment in which Epstein's public persona and his private practices operated on different planes. To those within his curated circles, he was a generous donor and a sophisticated confidant. To those he victimized, he was an architect of exploitation, using proximity and the trappings of influence to locate and ensnare vulnerable people. Epstein's social network read like an index of modern power. Politicians, business magnates, royalty, and celebrities frequented his parties and accepted his hospitality. These associations mattered. For Epstein, every photograph, every dinner, and every mutual acquaintance was potential leverage. It is critical to recognize the structural logic at play. Influence is often transactional. The handshake that seems innocuous in a social photograph can become protective later because shared appearances create social obligations and perceived mutual interests. When allegations arose, these networks complicated investigations. Institutions and individuals with reputations to manage had an incentive to avoid entanglement. Some distanced themselves, others maintained relationships. The ambiguity of association, of acquaintance versus complicity, created space for delay and for obfuscation. At the same time, survivors painted a consistent picture of recruitment and control. The recruitment often began with promises of opportunity, model casting calls, tutoring jobs, the promise of contact with influential people. These were the lures. Once inside, the dynamics shifted. Vulnerability was exploited. Isolation and manipulation became standard operating procedures. Assistants and trusted staff performed logistical and social functions that normalized the environment and contributed to the pattern of abuse. Complicity was not always overt. It frequently manifested as inattention, disbelief, or prioritization of reputation over investigation. Complaints were received by law enforcement and local authorities for years. Investigators interviewed witnesses. Witnesses provided leads. And yet the machinery of accountability moved slowly, sometimes imperceptibly. Settlements, non-disclosure agreements, and prosecutorial decisions shielded the picture from wider scrutiny until the case found new champions in journalists and survivors who refused to be silenced. In Palm Beach and elsewhere, the portrait that emerged from survivor testimony was of a carefully constructed system of exploitation. The process was methodical. Recruiters, sometimes presented as professional women acting as gatekeepers, approached young women with seemingly ordinary offers. The initial interactions promised mentorship, modeling opportunities, or financial help. Those seemingly benign offers functioned as a gateway. Once within Epstein's orbit, the boundaries shifted. Recruiters and staff coordinated travel, scheduled massage sessions, and managed communications. those who reported abuse to authorities encountered resistance, threats, legal intimidation, harassment by private investigators, and the grinding erosion of credibility. Confidentiality agreements and financial settlements offered an alternative to litigation, but they also inhibited broader disclosure. What distinguishes this phase is the degree to which private management of reputational risk substituted for public accountability. For a long time, a network of legal and financial instruments, supported by institutional caution or indifference, allowed the abuses to continue. Survival strategies for victims included silence, relocation, and for many, the psychological work of endurance. For others, the decision to speak out would come much later, often at great personal cost. The turning point in public understanding came in 2008, and it is now widely considered one of the most controversial prosecutorial agreements in recent American history. In 2005, local law enforcement in Palm Beach began an investigation after parents reported that a 14-year-old girl had been abused. That investigation uncovered allegations involving numerous potential victims. Local police sought robust charges. Federal prosecutors subsequently became involved. The resulting negotiations culminated in a plea agreement. Epstein pleaded guilty to 2 state charges: solicitation of prostitution and procuring a minor for prostitution. His custodial sentence amounted to 13 months in a county facility with notable work release privileges. The agreement also included a provision that effectively immunized potential co-conspirators from federal prosecution. The deal has been criticized for multiple reasons. Victims reported that they were not properly informed of the plea's scope. The Department of Justice's handling and the decisions of federal prosecutors at the time drew scrutiny and condemnation. For survivors, the outcomes of the plea were devastating. For Epstein, the agreement served as protection. He continued to maintain a life of access and influence. Journalistic persistence would eventually reopen the public conversation. Investigative reporting years later, reporting that exposed previously sealed documents and testified to prosecutorial choices, helped catalyze a broader reckoning. The reporting reanimated public outrage and reframed the 2008 agreement as an emblem of systemic failure rather than a singular prosecutorial decision. By the late 2000s, public tolerance for institutional obfuscation had diminished. The Me Too movement reshaped public norms and empowered survivors. In July 2019, federal authorities indicted Epstein on charges of sex trafficking and conspiracy to traffic minors. The indictment alleged a long-running scheme in which underage girls were allegedly recruited, transported, and exploited across multiple properties and jurisdictions. The arrest represented an inflection point. For survivors, it was an overdue validation that their allegations merited federal attention. For Epstein, it represented the narrowing of the margins he had long exploited. His legal team sought bail, offering substantial assets as collateral. Prosecutors, citing flight risk, opposed release. The court denied bail. Epstein was remanded to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan to await trial. The image of Epstein in a jail uniform, flanked by lawyers who had served presidents and billionaires, made the stakes unmistakable. It also highlighted the paradox. A man who had moved through circles of privilege was, for the first time, behind bars. The consequences of that moment would be abruptly altered within weeks. On August 10, 2019, Epstein was found dead in his cell. The Bureau of Prisons and the New York City Medical Examiner's Office ultimately ruled his death to be suicide by hanging. Yet, the circumstances produced persistent public unease. Reporting in the aftermath revealed multiple lapses. Cameras outside his cell reportedly malfunctioned that night. The inmate who had shared a cell with Epstein had been transferred hours earlier under circumstances that were later described as routine, but that nonetheless raised questions. Guards charged with conducting regular checks failed to follow the mandated schedule and subsequently claimed to have fallen asleep. Autopsy findings produced debate among forensic experts regarding the specific nature of his injuries, generating further dispute and speculation. For survivors, the loss of a public trial meant the forfeiture of an institutional stage where testimony might be placed under oath and where third parties could be questioned. For the public, it provoked suspicion about how institution, law, and influence had intersected in this case. Conspiracy theories proliferated alongside legitimate critiques. Some viewed the death as evidence of intentional silencing, others as the result of institutional negligence. Whatever the precise causal chain, the result was an abrupt and painful truncation of formal judicial reckoning. Investigations and inquiries followed, focusing on the circumstances of Epstein's death and procedural failures at the detention facility. The death amplified scrutiny on his associates, his estate, and those who had benefited from his patronage. It also redirected prosecutorial and public attention toward his closest confidants. The immediate legal consequences of Epstein's death were complicated. He could no longer be tried, but the civil litigation continued, led by survivors and by attorneys seeking to hold his estate to account. Ghislaine Maxwell, a principal figure in the ecosystem that had surrounded Epstein, faced indictment and stood trial in 2021. Her conviction, which included a guilty verdict on charges related to the recruitment and abuse of minors, provided a measure of legal accountability for some of the conduct central to the allegations against Epstein. Equally consequential was the slow unsealing of documents. Depositions, flight logs, and other materials that had been redacted or sealed became sources for further inquiry. Names previously obscured by legal protections entered public view. Investigations extended into institutions that had accepted Epstein's funds. Universities and philanthropic organizations were forced to confront whether to accept or return donations, and whether internal processes had allowed questionable funding sources to influence institutional priorities. Civil settlements between Epstein's estate and survivors yielded financial redress and, perhaps more importantly, public recognition of harm. They also raised questions about the limits of reparative mechanisms that substitute private compensation for public adjudication. Settlements can deliver resources and confidentiality. They can also shield historical patterns from full public accounting. Beyond litigation and institutional accounting, the Epstein case galvanized policy debates. Legislators, advocates, and criminal justice reformers confronted the limitations of existing trafficking statutes, the responsibilities of federal and local prosecutors, and the ways in which non-disclosure agreements can function to suppress evidence and testimony. The public conversation around sex trafficking and institutional complicity shifted in tone and scale. Survivors' advocacy amplified legal reforms and helped change the cultural terms in which these crimes are discussed. Yet, fundamental questions remain. How far did influence extend? Which institutions prioritized expediency over investigation? How many corridors of power were in effect closed to scrutiny? As documents continue to be released and as litigation proceeds, the picture becomes incrementally clearer, but it remains incomplete. The story of Jeffrey Epstein is at once singular and systemic. It is the chronicle of an individual who used extraordinary wealth to build privileged access. It is also an indictment of the networks and institutions that allowed that access to persist, despite warning signs. The case exposes the fragility of systems we rely upon to protect the vulnerable when those systems intersect with concentrated wealth and social prominence. If there is a central lesson, it is this. The mechanisms of influence can be both subtle and robust. Reputation, once established, can provide cover. Donations and proximity can create incentives that tilt institutional behavior away from aggressive inquiry and toward accommodation. Non-disclosure agreements, civil settlements, and prosecutorial discretion can limit public knowledge and constrain accountability. But the story offers a counterpoint, the power of persistence. Survivors, journalists, and advocates transformed whispers into evidence and silence into testimony. Their tenacity compelled courts to reopen conversations, forced institutions to examine their own complicity, and catalyzed policy reforms. Public attention, when sustained and focused, altered the calculus of consequence. The work that remains is not merely to identify names or to quantify influence. It is to reimagine accountability in a way that is resilient to wealth and reputation. It is to reform legal tools that shield wrongdoing, to ensure prosecutorial decisions are transparent and defensible, to scrutinize how philanthropy can warp institutional priorities, and to build social norms that prioritize the protection of the vulnerable over the comfort of the elite. This requires structural change. It demands legal reform, improved oversight of detention and custodial facilities, careful regulation of philanthropic gifts, accountability for financial institutions that facilitate exploitative networks, and a cultural shift in how institutions respond when powerful people are accused. It also requires sustained media attention and the support of civil society so that disclosures do not fade when the next headline arrives. Ultimately, the Epstein story is a test of collective will. It asks whether a society will allow the combination of wealth and secrecy to shield harm, or whether it will insist that justice be equal in its reach. The death of one man did not end the story. It is an invitation to examine the systems we build, to correct their seams, and to ensure that no amount of money, no combination of social connections, and no carefully curated reputation can place someone beyond the reach of accountability. Jeffrey Epstein's ghost will linger as long as questions remain unanswered. But the movement he unintentionally propelled has produced concrete changes and a renewed appetite for systemic reform. The unfinished work belongs to institutions, to lawmakers, and to citizens who refuse to accept that influence should determine justice. This story demands more than curiosity. It demands reflection and action. If you watch this film and feel discomfort, that discomfort has a purpose. It is a prompt to examine how your institutions, the universities, the banks, the charities, and the media are governed, and how they respond when faced with moral compromise. It is a reminder that vigilance matters. It is a challenge to ensure that our systems protect those who cannot protect themselves. We will continue to track developments as documents are unsealed, as litigation progresses, and as institutional reforms are proposed and enacted. Survivors deserve a full accounting, and society deserves institutions that respond to allegations with rigor and integrity, rather than with deference to status. If this story gave you perspective, consider taking a moment to engage. Subscribe to the channel so you can follow future investigations, share it, so that more people understand its implications, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Dialogue is part of accountability. Thank you for listening. Stay vigilant, stay informed, and together we can ensure that power is never allowed to stand above justice.